So what I wanted to talk to you about is how I approach hurricane season. Because again, I'm not just someone who works at the Hurricane Center and thinks about hurricanes as part of my job. Because again, my most important job is being a dad and a husband, and I'm a homeowner. And I really do think about hurricane season not just from the forecasting point of view, but the personal point of view. In fact, for all of us at the Hurricane Center, hurricane preparations are really a deeply personal topic. We live the hurricane problem just like you do, and a lot of the issues you face here in the Houston area are issues we face in the Miami area. You know, this time of year, April, May, and even early in the hurricane season here in June, we talk a lot about what the upcoming season is going to be like. And I get asked all the time what the hurricane season is going to be like. And some of you have already heard me say this today, but I have to say it over and over. My title is Hurricane Center Director. My title is not Hurricane Director. A lot of people would like me to direct the hurricanes somewhere else. I wish I could do that, because I don't want a hurricane at my house any more than you do. But we talk a lot about what the season's going to be like, and you've probably heard about the seasonal forecasts. Going to be below average, perhaps. And it's really important to think to ourselves over and over again that it only takes one. It only takes one. And does anybody remember that one hurricane up on the screen? It might look familiar to you if you were in the Houston area at the time. This is Alicia making landfall in Texas, here in this area in 1983. How many of you were here in '83 for Alicia? Okay. And I was too, so were my parents, and I remember it very, very well. I was out in the Katy area on the western side of town where it wasn't as bad as it was downtown in terms of the winds, but I vividly remember hearing the reports of tornadoes happening and the damage that was happening downtown and so forth. Very scary night. What a lot of people don't remember about 1983 was what was that whole season like? Does anybody remember the rest of the 83 season? Well, here's a zoom in, because at the Hurricane Center, if you go to hurricanes.gov, we have maps of all the hurricanes that have happened every year. So we have one map for every year. And this is a zoom of what 1983 looked like just in the Gulf of Mexico and in Texas. Does anybody know how many total storms for the whole Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, how many total storms occurred throughout that entire area for the whole year? Alicia was one of them, and it was the first one. And you see another one on this map. Do you know how many more there were? Yeah, Dan from the Weather Service office knows, but he's a meteorologist, so that's cheating, okay? If you zoom out, you might be thinking, well, we got hit by Alicia, there was another hurricane that hit just south of Texas. Wow, that must have been a really busy year overall. Let's zoom out. And it wasn't 3, but you're close. It was only 4. That map is the entire activity for all of 1983. There was nothing in the Caribbean Sea, nothing in the deep tropical Atlantic. 4 total storms that whole year. And there was only 1 major hurricane. And congratulations, Houston, you got that 1 major hurricane. So Houston has the best example, and I use it all the time. I talk about y'all all the time, that it only takes 1. And 4 storms, that's a way below average year. And so if you're hearing the seasonal forecast for this year saying it might be 6 to 11 storms and up to 2 major hurricanes, you know what I think when I hear that? And I think of 1983, well, let's see. In '83, there were 4 storms, 1 major hurricane, and I got hit. So if there's going to be 6 to 11 and up to 2 major hurricanes, oh my gosh, it could be so much worse. So don't be thinking this year with the forecast saying below average that means you can't be hit. Because we know here in Houston that it can happen in a below average year. This is 1992. Hurricane Andrew going through the Gulf of Mexico. Does anybody remember how many storms there were other than Andrew that year? There were only 7 total storms that year. So Alicia is not the only example. 1992 with Andrew is another example. So if anybody tells you, Houston, your Alicia example is odd, that never happens when you have a major impact in a below average year. It happened in 1983, it happened in 1992. In 1972, we had a June hurricane named Agnes that ended up causing 122 deaths up in the Northeast due to flooding. 1957, Hurricane Audrey in the Gulf of Mexico in an El Nino year, below average year. So again, it really does only take one. Now here's another little test. See how much you really know about past hurricane seasons. Here's a zoom of the Gulf of Mexico. Well, see, there's no hurricanes hitting Texas. There's no hurricane hitting the US. That must have been a pretty quiet year overall too, right? Not so fast. That was 2010, one of the busiest years that we've had overall. And that's a year where you had way above average numbers of hurricanes and major hurricanes, but not one of them came ashore in the US as a hurricane. So you can have below average year and a really bad year. You can have an above average year and where you live or in the US overall, a pretty good year. So these seasonal forecasts don't talk about landfalls. Don't let anybody tell you that this year is going to be slow, or it's going to be quiet, or it's going to be boring. And my personal favorite over the last few days, I saw a newspaper article that said this year could be a snoozer. Okay? How much of a snoozer was it in 1983? Okay? So you just tell all those folks that it only takes one, and we in Houston know better than anybody else. Here's some other examples of how it doesn't take a major hurricane to have major impacts. And here are more examples how I talk about y'all all the time. We've heard earlier today, maybe you've seen on the news and elsewhere, that not one major hurricane has hit the United States since Wilma in 2005. Isn't that great? Isn't that good news? Haven't we been lucky? And you all know that it doesn't even take a hurricane to make it a bad year. Who was here for Allison in 2001? That was never a hurricane. It really wasn't all that big, and maybe Dan can correct me from the Weather Service office, but I don't think it generated that many tornadoes. Allison's problem was it would not move, and it sat over Houston for all that time, and we were measuring the rainfall in feet instead of inches, again, like we did recently. Again, never a hurricane. So there's no such thing as just a tropical storm. Tropical storms can be really bad, as Allison was. And then there's Ike, which again was not a major hurricane, category 3 or stronger when it made landfall in southeast Texas. But again, that category only talks about the maximum wind. It's a wind scale, and Ike was category 2 on that wind scale. You know what Ike's problem was? It was huge, horizontally, extremely large. And Ike was large just like Rita and Katrina and Isaac in 2012, like Sandy in 2012. So all other factors considered equal, a large hurricane is worse, because a larger hurricane is much more able to produce the storm surge than a smaller hurricane is. How many of you have a swimming pool that you have in your backyard that you can go to? How many of you have an ocean nearby that you might be able to go to? Okay? You can do a little experiment. The kids can do this. It's easy to figure out why a big hurricane makes more storm surge than a small hurricane. A small hurricane is like sticking your finger in the water and going around in little tiny circles. You're not going to move the pool water around very quickly. But a big hurricane like Ike is like standing in the swimming pool and sticking your arms out and going around in a circle. Okay? You're able to push a lot more water toward the side of the pool. And that's what Ike did, even though it was category 2, because of its large size, it produced all that storm surge. So Allison, Ike, Isaac, Debbie, Isaac, Sandy, all of these systems that have affected the U.S. in the last several years, the last decade, they've not been major hurricanes, but they've had major impacts. So don't let anybody tell you it's all good news that we haven't had major hurricanes, and y'all in Houston know better than anybody else with Hurricane Ike in 2008. And you notice that all of the storms that I just talked about, what has the hazard been? Has it been wind or has it been water? It's been the water. You know, water has been the biggest problem and has caused the most damage and taken the most lives during this last decade of not having major hurricanes Category 3 or stronger. And so we actually ran the numbers on this and looked back at the past several decades of what has caused people to die in landfalling tropical systems in the United States. And about half of them have died because of what Ike caused, all that storm surge. Another quarter of the fatalities have been due to what Allison caused. Fatalities due to heavy rainfall, inland flooding. And then, any of you spend any time at the beach, go out on a boat, we've lost a lot of lives at the beach due to heavy surf, rip currents, people being out in dangerous ocean conditions out on a boat. And so 9 out of 10 people that have died in landfalling tropical systems in the United States have died because of water, not the wind. Now, the wind is still dangerous and damaging and can be deadly. You know, Andrew showed us that, Alicia showed us that, Charlie showed us that. But, you know, so we don't want to forget about the wind, and we need to hide from it and be safe from it when a hurricane or tornado or other strong winds are coming. But we have to remember that hurricanes and tropical storms are not just big wind machines. They can generate a lot of water from the ocean due to storm surge or inland flooding due to heavy rains, and that's what's killing most of the people. So the fact that you are all here today means that you can now go out and spread these messages. It only takes one. It doesn't take a major hurricane, doesn't even take a hurricane. And it's not just about the wind, it's about the water. So if you can help spread some of those messages, that's what we've learned the last several years from the storms and hurricanes that have occurred. So let's get down to the real world of what are we going to do to get ready for the next hurricane. And this is my personal hurricane to-do list that, in very general terms, is how I approach every hurricane season. And I really do think about it in 4 major categories: planning for evacuation, buying my supplies, visiting my insurance agent, and strengthening my home. And as we heard from the mayor this morning, there's something like 1 million new residents in the Houston area as compared to when Ike occurred. And a lot of them might be wondering, what do I do to get ready for a hurricane? Where do I start? It's too hard, it's too expensive, it's too complicated, I don't know where to get the information, I'm overwhelmed. I would really recommend to you and to anyone else you talk to, if you're not sure where to start with the evacuation question. As the mayor showed, you've got in the guides today, it shows you where the evacuation zones are. Now, some of you, maybe a lot of you, are not in evacuation zones, but a lot of you maybe are. What do you do when you find out you are in one of these zones? Well, you want to spend this weekend deciding where you would go and how you would get there if you were ever told to evacuate by the emergency managers. You want to think about that in advance. And you don't need to be planning to go to Oklahoma. Okay, you're not going to have to drive that far. Okay, you want to find a friend, a family member, ideally some inland location out of the hurricane evacuation zones, and that would be your destination. And figure all that out today, because if you wait till the hurricane is on our doorstep and now you're trying to decide, where am I going to go, how am I going to get there, it's much more difficult to figure that out at the last minute. Now, how many of you, based on what you know at the moment, are pretty sure you live in one of these hurricane storm surge evacuation zones? Okay? Okay, so that's the homework assignment for you, if you haven't already done it, is to figure out where you'd go and how you would get there if told to evacuate. And then when a hurricane is coming, your job is to evacuate if the emergency manager says so. Now, how many of you are pretty sure you're not in one of the hurricane storm surge evacuation zones? Okay, there's something for you to do as well, okay? You need to find someone that you know, a friend, a family member, a coworker, someone you know does live in one of these evacuation zones. You could either plan with them now to be their inland evacuation destination, or help them figure out where their inland evacuation destination is going to be. So we can all work together, whether we're in the evacuation zones or not. We can all work together on evacuation planning, because if those of us who live inland don't help out the folks who do live in these zones and be their inland destination, then they have to work a little harder to find hotels or shelters or whatever it's going to be. So let's all work together on evacuation planning. And then let's all go shopping. Who likes to go shopping? Okay. Go to ready.gov, for example, and there are other resources you've probably received here today at the local level. They provide you a list of the supplies. There's a huge display back there behind you with examples of what supplies to purchase. Go shopping now to get those supplies, because let's fantasize reality a little bit here. What's it going to be like if we in the Hurricane Center and the Weather Service issue a hurricane watch or warning for this area, and you decide, okay, time to go shopping for my hurricane supplies? Let's think about how that's really going to go. Okay, you're going to go get in some really, really long line, and it'll probably be August or September or sometime between June and November, when it's not cold or pleasant all the time here in Houston. It might be hot. You'll be waiting in a long line, and you'll get all aggravated, because that's what would happen to me if I was in a long line in the heat, waiting to get to the front of the line to buy the supplies I need. And then when you get to the front of the line, there's a good chance that what you desperately need, they're going to be out of, because everybody else in front of the line got it before you got there. And those are going to be supplies you desperately need to get through the storm and the aftermath. So let's go get those now. Go get the shopping done now. Makes the stress level go down immensely. So after we go shopping, I know this is the fun part. Don't get all excited. This is the fun part. You get to go visit your insurance agent. Okay? Cool insurance, right? But think about what it's going to be like if a hurricane is out there, hurricane watch or warning's up, and you realize, well, the storm surge could come where I live, or I know that rain can cause inland flooding. It could flood where I live, and I don't have flood insurance. Or I don't have enough insurance, whether I rent or whether I own. It's not going to be possible at that late stage when a hurricane's almost here to get the coverage into place before the storm gets here. So how many times have you all seen on the news after a storm or hurricane or other major event, and a microphone goes in somebody's face, and they describe how they've just lost everything and they didn't have enough insurance, and they don't know how they're ever going to get back on their feet again? Insurance is financial security. It's crucial. So go visit your insurance agent, and truthful, I do this every year. I talk to my insurance agent every year. And think about some reasons why you might need to do this every year. I just renovated my bathrooms and kitchen. We had some plumbing leaks, and we just had to do it this past year. I renovated bathrooms and kitchen, and that changes the replacement cost. And so if I don't go visit my insurance agent and make sure my insurance is up to date based on that, then I might not be able to put everything back the way it was. It might cost more money than I have. And again, flood insurance is not part of your homeowner's policy by default. You got to go get flood insurance separately. Okay? So go visit your insurance agent, and whether you rent or you own, for your home, for your business, and make sure you got the coverage you need. Okay? And then finally, strengthening your home. This has to do with what are you going to protect the windows with from the wind, and taking down projectiles so they don't fly through the air and run into your house and your neighbor's house. Anything you can do to strengthen your home. So all of these things are what I'm thinking about going into this hurricane season. Here are some websites. Go to hurricanes.gov. We have a preparation section. Ready.gov is a national website, but I'm sure you've gotten some listings and resources here for where to learn more about this kind of planning. And there's another website I want to give you to write this one down if you don't have it already. It's flash.org. Just like you would spell the word flash.org. It's a nonprofit organization that is a very important partner to the National Hurricane Center, and they have information about how to make sure you have enough insurance coverage, how to make your home stronger. So take down these websites and spend some time on them, and hopefully they will be helpful to you. So hurricanes.gov, ready.gov, flash.org, and then all the websites and the resources that you've heard about today from this event for local planning and information. Okay. Now, just a little bit about what we're going to be doing at the Hurricane Center differently this year and going forward. One thing I'll say is that all the forecasts and warnings that we put out, all the evacuation instructions that are issued by emergency managers, none of that is going to be as effective as we need it to be if all of you and everybody, all residents and homeowners and business owners, if you haven't planned in advance for what you're going to do, then our information isn't as useful. So it really is a partnership. Here's something new we're doing. We started doing it last year. It's a new product that we have. Fortunately, this graphic is not for right now. This is just an example of a graphic that we could issue if a hurricane was approaching southeast Texas. And this is a storm surge graphic that we call the potential storm surge flooding map. And this would be something that we would issue in real time when a hurricane's out there, starting about a couple days before landfall. And what it does is has a color-coded map to show you how far inland from the Gulf of Mexico the storm surge flooding could go in that particular case, and how high above the ground, based on the color, how high above the ground the water could get. In this particular example, we are showing how far inland the water could go around Galveston Bay, and that it could get to be more than 6, more than 9 feet deep in some places. Storm surge gets really deep. And if you see, for example, that you're in the area that is in the orange, greater than 6 feet above the ground, that means, I'm almost 6 feet tall, that means the water will be potentially above my head. And this is what you'd want to be planning for. And hopefully if you see this and you're also being told by your emergency manager to evacuate, you'll know why. Because we will be showing this, and the television folks might be showing it, your emergency managers will be looking at it, and they'll use this to help them decide who needs to evacuate. So when you see this, your homework assignment, your action at that time is, if your emergency manager tells you to evacuate, you go. And if you're not being told to evacuate, then you stay and shelter in place. So this is a new graphic we're using to show what could happen. And then that graphic started last year. We'll have it available this year, but this year there are actually 2 storm surge graphics. One is showing what the flooding could be, and then the right-hand one is an example of a new storm surge watch warning graphic that we're issuing this year. It's just a prototype, not an actual warning yet. But if you see your area colored in our new storm surge watch warning graphic, that just means there's a pretty big chance of life-threatening storm surge in your area. And again, all you need to do when you see these graphics is to see if your area is those that potentially could be affected, and then evacuate if you're told to do so by your emergency managers. They're the ones who make the evacuation call. Okay? Who's on Twitter? Anybody? Who's on Facebook? Okay. National Hurricane Center is on both. You can easily find us on Facebook. Just search for Facebook, National Hurricane Center. We have a lot of different Twitter accounts. So those are just additional ways to communicate with us. Facebook is a place where we answer a lot of questions, have two-way conversations with folks. And on Twitter, we mostly send information out, but we are currently working on a new account that hopefully soon we'll be able to start. That will be a way for you to have question and answer with us on Twitter. But if you want to ask me any questions any time of the year, I'm on Twitter as NHC Director, and whenever I have the time, I engage with the public on that. and it's a good way to hear what I'm saying, what's going on. But if you also want to know when we're having new advisories come out, that comes out on NHC Atlantic. So there's ways you can monitor Twitter to notify you when you have a new message from a particular account, and we send out our new advisories or anything else important operationally on that Twitter account. So just another way for us to stay in touch so the conversation doesn't end today.